Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan. We're coming to you guys midweek following Oregon State's season opening loss to Cal. Oregon State back at home this weekend, taking on the Fresno State Bulldogs. We'll be breaking in to that matchup entirely, recapping Cal. Pleased to be joined by Ryan Harlan. If you guys checked out our post-Cal breakdown video, there was a lot to get into from that Cal game. Definitely not quite the performance that many of us were expecting. But again, it's just one game, as they say, and in the most Belichickian manner. And I feel like it's apropos, Ryan, considering how much Belichick got, window dressed this weekend. On to Fresno, and I think that's got to be Oregon State's mindset. We'll be kind of diving into it. Make sure you're locked in to BeaversEdge.com for all the latest. We know the Oregon State message boards on the damn board have been super busy this week. Lots of conversations, lots of talk about the offense that really struggled against Cal. Definitely make sure you're in on that. And again, just before we get into it, want to make sure to mention again that we've got an awesome deal going to Beavers Edge right now. You can head on over and you can join Beavers Edge for $1 for your first week. And then after your first week, you stay in, you get Beavers Edge for a year and The Athletic for a year. That's two awesome services for just that one price. So again, make sure to check that out at BeaversEdge.com, and then you get all of our premium content, all the best stuff we have to offer. Then you can message Ryan and I directly. And I made note yesterday, Ryan's been very busy on the message boards the last couple days, fending off, offensive questions, personnel questions. Ryan, there were just so many questions after that Cal game that we certainly couldn't have wrapped it up in just a 6 or 7 minute post game video that we did. And there was a lot to dive into. The Beavers were obviously back at it this week. Started with Trent Bray's press conference on Monday, offense on Tuesday, and then as we're recording this on Wednesday, defense today. Ryan, obviously your quick thoughts on the team before we go back and kind of look at Cal. How's the team's response been this week? Or are we still kind of level-headed? What do you think's going on with the kind of mental psyche of the team after that kind of ugly Cal loss in a lot of ways?
No, I would say this team is kind of under the mentality of we're on to Fresno. Like that's basically kind of what, this team can really do right now, kind of going forward. I mean, it's easy to dwell on a loss, right? But then again, at the same time, if you do that, things can easily snowball. And talking with Kai Wallen and Sai Vindrawale today, like that's some of the things there. They're like, hey, look, like, yeah, we just got beat by ourselves and the little things that were, kind of going on in game. And really, those are the things that we need to clean up, have a little more sense of urgency, play to what our standard is and what we know we can play, especially on that side of the ball. And then also too, like yesterday with talking with Coach McCann, like, Trent Walker was one of the lone highlights on offense in that game. But, McCann basically said like, hey, look, yeah, Trent's the first to tell you like, yeah, sure, I might have had, the stat line that he had in that game, but like left some, plays out there or left some moments out there on the field. And even Kai and Sai also said that as well too. So it's a lot of that where I think there's a little more, I'd say, sense of urgency to right the ship and be able to take in from this past weekend and be like, okay, this is what worked, this is what didn't, and this is what we need to be as a team going forward. Because I mean, like, it's really much where it's like, okay, yeah, week one, there are teams that got boat raced a little bit that didn't show their best stuff. Oregon State kind of being one of those teams in there, as you mentioned, with UNC and Bill Belichick. That's another great example of that. But like that's something there where I think, you don't really know until what a team is until you get out there and you start playing, and what practice shows you. Sure, it shows you a lot about what a team is, but like it's very different when you get out on the field and start playing in an actual game versus practice. Right. So that's something there where I think this week is going to be a good kind of litmus test to see where this team is at headed into Fresno. And I mean, I know, yeah, if you look at the tape against Fresno and what they've done the past 2 weeks, they're also still kind of a team that, you don't kind of know what they are right now. I mean, sure, yeah, they ran the ball really well last week, but it's like, okay, yeah, as Kai said to us when asked about that question about stopping the run, it was good for them. Like that doesn't matter. You're going into this week and prepping for that as if it's, a 1-0 kind of matchup. So even with them having two games under their belt, I think, this team is looking to basically wash the taste of what Cal was, and then going on to, get a win, first win of the season, and be able to prep themselves for a tough road game stretch these next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think, just kind of getting into it, Ryan, like pretty much, what we expected from the offense. I still think there's a ton of questions. I think even now as we sit here,
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
again, we were kind of talking about this as we were walking to the press conference, maybe from the press conference, all of our walks across Reeser. But, the advanced numbers, the PFF numbers that we ran at Beaver's Edge kind of indicated what we kind of saw is that the defense kind of got better as the game went along. We saw some moments, and again, it was far from a polished product, but I still have confidence that Trent Bray, his acumen, like we've seen that movie before. I think he will get that defense up to a place where they'll be playing solid football and winning football. That's less of a worry. For me, Ryan, the offense is kind of a worry because going back to something you and I have kind of discussed behind the scenes for 2 years now, it's like, what exactly is Ryan Gunderson's offense? And I think we kind of have an idea. It's kind of a run-based spread, and we know they like to run the ball. We know that just from what we've seen occasionally, and even this last weekend, and I chuckle because I just remembered, oh yeah, Oregon State's Ryan Gunderson offense has a option element to it. We saw Giovanni McCoy have one of his longest runs ever last year, but then I remembered, Ryan, the option play the Beavers ran this last week against Cal was blown up and was so bad. That was why I was just chuckling. Like it just seems to me like there's not, dare I say, Ryan, a couple years back, and you were in the program long enough to know, it's not apples and oranges, it's totally different. But your line that you've gone with Simon Sandberg for years, how when they let Tim Tibesar go, it allowed the defense to play free, or I'm paraphrasing slightly, I think, but just something along those lines. And I almost wonder if, like, the offense, from what we've seen from Gundy from a year two, we've heard about how simple it can be. It's not nearly as difficult to pick up as maybe, say, Brian Lindgren's offense previously. But I almost wonder if, like, kind of that same mentality applies, Ryan, where it's like maybe players need to be able to play faster and freer. And I don't know. I'm kind of just spitballing, but what do you think of that take?
No, I think that's fair, right? And I mean, yeah, sure, it's hard to compare, defensive play to offensive play in football, but I really do think that when you have guys playing their best on both sides of the ball, it's when they're playing fast, simple, understand their role, understand what they're doing in their system, doing 1/11th of, at least on defense, 1/11th of, what their job is. So that's something there where I think, you can translate that probably over to offense and you can see a lot more success. I mean, you mentioned the option game, and sure, that's fine, that's flashy, people love it, right? But at the same time, though, too, if your offense isn't good at executing it, it's not the same personnel that you had a year ago. Also, too, by the way, I should add that. But like, if they're not good at executing it, then don't include it. Like, and that's something there where you want to tailor your offense to what your players are best at, what they can do really well, really effectively to create that sense of identity. And I don't really want to compare this to the Ducks by any means, because that is a different level of competition in terms of strategy that they have offensively and what Will Stein has been able to do. But Stein, that first year, had a really complicated playbook. And you saw how that impacted Oregon in those first two games last year, where they didn't look like, the Oregon that you'd expect them to be. But then when Stein simplified it down, that's when they started to have a lot more success offensively and what they were able to do and how they were able to attack opposing defenses, especially too in that Ohio State game. So simple is sometimes better. Like, that's something there where I think if you try to do too much and if you try to get in your own way and overthink some of these calls, or throw in kind of having the Jabari package when you did offensively. And that's no knock on Jabari, I want to say as well. It's
Sure.
like it loses feel of the game. It kind of, you're throwing something to make it stick. Like that, just in that moment, I just didn't think, out of what you were able to do at that point offensively where it would have worked out in your favor, it didn't. And that's something there where if you're going to use that going forward, I think you need to be a little more savvy about doing that. Almost make it like a Jack Coletto type of package, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
Like that's something there where I think that kind of, quarterback system can really work and really thrive in that realm. And yeah, I want to preface again, like this is no knock on Jabari either. I think this was like just a heat of the moment desperation attempt to try and get something different, to get Cal on their heels a little bit, because nothing had been working
Right.
really offensively up until that point. So that was where I think that kind of came in. But it's really, I think for Gunderson going forward, it's simplifying down the playbook, saying this is what we do really well. We want to run the ball to open up the passing game. And these are the things that we're going to do to attack you vertically, horizontally in the passing game,
Right.
rather than trying to, be something that you're not. And that's something there where I think Gundy needs to grow that element of himself as a play caller and be able to basically take a look at the film and be like, okay, clearly what we did last week does not work. This is what we're going to do. We're going to stick to the fundamentals. You heard that defensively as well. Like fundamentals are a big thing for this group. So that's something there where I think, like that's like returning to that. If you're Oregon State and what you did against Washington State, like, yeah, absolutely. So that's something there where I think, this group should be able to return to that and find a lot more success than they did last week.
Yeah, I mean it just was a rough performance. And I think there's a lot of reasons, right? I mean, at the same token, I also don't know if at one point, like when you find yourself down 14-0 as quickly as they did, there's also like the aspect of, okay, maybe now Gundy's calling a different game. So I don't want to put all the pressure. I think getting punched in the mouth the way that they did just right out the gate, just it took the air out of the stadium, it took the air out of the press box, and you're just like, oh. And, I think maybe even to an extent, Oregon State's players felt that way. Even when you were down 7-0 and then the first snap on offense is a fumbled snap, that just kind of set the tone for what would be a really tough day. And then I go back to the thread that I put on the board a couple days ago where it's like, Oregon State flat out got out coached in the sense of, Ryan and I were walking around pregame being like, oh, look, there's Ron Rivera. There's Justin Wilcox. There's Brian Harsin. There's Nick Rolovich. That's a lot of coaching experience across that staff. More than, way more head coaching experience than Oregon State's has by far. And to an extent in a game one like this, I think largely, Ryan, Justin Wilcox copy and pasted his game plan against the Beavers last year where it's like, hey, we shut down their running game, make them be a passing based offense where they drop back and we can have our guys play one-on-one with them. We're going to have success. And you saw that right away. Anthony Hankerson wasn't able to get going. I think that was maybe the biggest thing as to why the offense wasn't able to have more success. And with that being said, Maalik Murphy, I don't think the loss was on him. He obviously had the interception that kind of was the backbreaker, but still found some success with Trent Walker. I think overall there is a lot to like about what he was able to show, but at the same token, the big hole, Cal had the momentum, and once it got to a certain point, the Beavers just were playing catch up from too far behind, and you kind of felt like they had moments to maybe get back in the game, namely end of that second or end of the first half when they were driving, could have gotten field goal range and made it, I believe, a 14-6 game. Bryce Caulfield, unfortunate fumble, but that was just kind of like the what else can go wrong kind of a situation in that moment, Ryan. And I think, we were talking like what would be the Rosing halftime speech. And, I think the Beavers did play better in the second half at times, got a few stops and whatnot. But ultimately the damage was done. I think the Beavers just kind of never really recovered from that initial punch in the mouth that they had to open the game.
Yeah, and sometimes that's just football, right? Like that's also part of it too. So, at the end of the day, right? Like, yeah, and as what I said earlier, it's like all you can do is, flush it, move on to next week and, turn your sights to Fresno.
Absolutely. And again, just catching up here on the Edge podcast, Beavers Edge publisher Brenden Slaughter, Beavers Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan, getting you guys ready for Oregon State Fresno coming up this weekend. Again, make sure you check out all of our content at BeaversEdge.com. We've got awesome content right now. And then obviously leading up to the game, we'll have a closer look at our injury report. Dylan Callahan Crowley be taking a look at the Edge report, position by position. Loads more content, the visitor list, who's going to be on campus this next weekend. Lots of stuff at Beaver's Edge to keep tabs on. But again, Ryan, as you mentioned, now Oregon State will close the book, and the old saying goes in college football that you make your biggest adjustments from week 1 to week 2, and that's why you often see teams schedule FCS opponents in week 1 because you have a bigger margin for error for things that maybe aren't working so well. That wasn't a luxury Oregon State had this season with the quasi-independent schedule, but nevertheless, Cal may also, Ryan, just be a tougher. Cal may be better than people expect. Like that could also be a possibility. I'm not going to put a ton of stock into that, but they could just be better than people expect to an extent,
Yeah,
especially
and that's also
defensively.
yeah, because you return a lot of production on that side of the ball, right? So that's something there where I think, there is part of that. And then also too, it's week 1. You don't know what both those teams were going to be. Like I was talking to Mike Parker pregame, and I was telling him like I think it's going to be close. Like that was kind of before, the results on the field that, unfolded soon
Sure,
after.
sure.
But in reality though, like I told him it was you don't know what Jaron was going to be quite yet. Obviously he did something right enough to win the job for Cal, and that showed out on the field. But also too, it's like you don't know what Oregon State's going to be offensively or defensively either. You don't know what Cal is going to be even with that returning talent defensively. So that's something there where, there's so many moving, parts and pieces and things where it's just, it just kind of happens the way that it does. And, it's football at the end of the day. Like that's really the way that I see it. And yeah, those two sequences, while unfortunate, were, just a microcosm of the game that we like to watch, not only as reporters but also as fans. It's that's really the way that I see it, the way that I look at it.
Yeah, again, it's just one of those where I think it's entirely possible. I think you summed it up perfectly that, it might have just been a tough matchup for Oregon State right out the gate. And, ultimately, I think you just kind of, like you said, have to flush it, move on. And now the Beavers certainly can't rest on their laurels, Ryan, by any means, because you got Fresno State coming in. As Beaver fans know, Fresno State historically has always been a very tough matchup for them. And again, we kind of highlighted some things with Fresno State in our closer look at Fresno State story up on BeaversEdge.com. And again, just to kind of show the nature of the series, Ryan, Fresno State leads the all-time series 8-6. Beaver fans will fondly remember the 35-32 thriller back in 2022 with Jack Coletto running in for the touchdown late in the game, as opposed to Oregon State going for the field goal. At home, Oregon State's had the advantage. They haven't lost a game to Fresno since '91. At home, they're 5-2 overall. And again, we diving into Fresno this year, not as good of a Fresno team as we maybe saw 3 years back with Jake Haener and that team that put multiple guys in the NFL. And again, Jake Haener's still in the NFL. But for the most part, this is a game that's within reach for Oregon State, considering that we expect Cal to be better than Fresno State. And again, the Bulldogs have had the benefit of having 2 games this season compared to Oregon State's one. Fresno State played in week 0 against Kansas and got absolutely railroaded by Kansas in that game, 31-7, but then bounced back with a blowout win over Georgia Southern at home last week, and then now come to Corvallis. So by no means, Ryan, is this your, quote, gimme game. And the FCS will kind of dive into what we like statistically from Fresno State. But just to put the onus and the pressure on this game, Ryan, this becomes a must-win game for Oregon State. Otherwise, you're staring down the barrel of an 0-4 start. And that's not trying to be, overly pessimistic, but just knowing what we have ahead of us with Texas Tech and Oregon still on the horizon. You need to get a win here, or you could be staring at an 0-4 start to the season. And that is the kind of start where not just questions are asked, like big time questions are asked. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Like that's Yeah, this is the 1 week to where like I'm like, okay, now the margin's razor thin basically now for any mistakes you make on Saturday. And yeah, you don't want the worst case scenario to happen in an 0-4 potential start, but it's that's also part of the game of football too, where but I really do think that this is going to be a really big test on Saturday to see where this team is at mentally post Cal and then what adjustments have been made on both sides of the ball. Because if the same product shows up from week one, if those mistakes and inconsistencies show up again, then you run into issues, I think, going forward. And that's where those questions definitely can be asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, looking at the matchups again, we'll get into Fresno State's defense here in a minute, but I actually think what Fresno State does offensively will work well. Again, kind of somewhat lost in the shuffle, Ryan, is I still thought Oregon State's run defense was pretty solid. I didn't think it was world beaters, but it also wasn't bad. I thought they did a pretty good job of containing Cal. There were a few quarterback scrambles, a few runs that broke, but I thought that was a pretty good effort. And then again, so far. Fresno State has kind of proven of being more of a run-based team, at least early on. Bryson Donaldson, Rayshawn Luke have kind of been the guys there. And meanwhile, at the same token, EJ Warner, big name, lots of yards, leads the FBS in all-time, or excuse me, leads the FBS in active career passing yards with just above 9,000. But Ryan, he's been on a turnover train to start the season. He is only thrown for 355 yards in 2 games, has a QBR rating of 65, but has 4 picks. So again, if I'm Oregon State secondary, that's something, that's kind of, you go back to EJ Warner's stats. He's kind of struggled with interceptions throughout his career. Again, if you make him look good, anybody can look good back there. But I think there could be an opportunity for Oregon State's defensive backs to maybe make some plays. And then, Fresno State's run game might be able to be contained by Oregon State. So at least offensively, on paper, I kind of like how this matches up. I think Oregon State's defense will have a easier time getting after Fresno State than they would Cal. Fresno State does have some decent size on the offensive line, I'll say that. But I still think Oregon State will be able to make some adjustments and, put some pressure on EJ Warner, who, again, has already had some interceptions this year.
I know you say that, but then again, have we not learned our lesson from last year? Anytime you looked at a quarterback, their stats and how they've performed and how they looked against Oregon State. I mean, albeit, yeah, that's 2024. This could be a completely different story in
Sure.
2025. But like, just from that alone, though, that's like I think, prepping for this, especially defensively, pressure is going to be key.
Absolutely.
And that's something there where if you can get after the quarterback consistently and kind of make that offense one dimensional and force EJ Warner to beat you down the field with his arm, then yeah, I think, you at least get, a little more opportunistic with turnovers. But at the same time, though, I'm like, we almost were kind of in that boat a few times last year of saying, oh, this quarterback is that, looks like this, these are the stats.
Sure.
And then eventually, goes out there and looks like, the second coming of any NFL quarterback out there against the Beavers
Right.
last year. And, I'm like, sure, could EJ Warner, have a really solid game and turn things around on Saturday? Yeah, absolutely. Like that is, without a doubt. But at the same time, though, too, he also could be, what he has been in his career at multiple stops, so far in college. And that's also something there, too, where, I think if you look at the tape and be able to see, his strengths and weaknesses and what he is as a quarterback, like despite the last name, just get after him on Saturday. And then, I think you put yourself in a good spot to right the ship
No,
this
and I
weekend.
totally, and I think you're absolutely right, Ram. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention the amount of quarterbacks who seemed to have career days last year against this defense. And early on, you look at it like for the most part, the only thing that really inspired me as the game went on was I think Oregon State's defensive backs will grow. I think we'll watch Trey Glasper and Tucker, excuse me, grow as the year goes on, as evidenced by Skylar Thomas, who in the post game was, bold, being like, "Oh yeah, Trey Glasper's better than I am already," and I'm like, "Whoa, okay." Like we think Skylar Thomas is pretty good. So again, I think that comes with rookies, and I think that to an extent Trent Bray addressed that. Defensive line, some questions as far as I thought the run defense was solid, but not nearly enough pressure on the quarterback, as you mentioned. I don't know if you're going to get Tavita Pomee back this weekend. Maybe, maybe not. Again, this is the new Trent Bray era with injuries, folks. So it's we're using our best. Go
Well, I'll
ahead.
say this. Rod Chance did say that he's hopeful to have him back for this weekend. It's more of a matter of how he responds, to kind of whatever, he's been dealing with and
Hmm.
where he's at this
Sure,
week. So
could be helpful.
it's really more of that than I think anything else. And then yeah, as you said with injuries, another one to mention along the offensive line, Jacob Strand. We don't know his status going into Saturday, so another name to keep an eye on before Beavers take on Fresno State.
Absolutely, and we'll have a little bit more information in that and our injury report coming up on Thursday. Make sure to check that out too. But luckily, Oregon State did have some guys. I think we saw Josiah Timateo finish the finish the game off at left tackle. He was obviously a starting left tackle at Nevada all of last season. So the Beavers do have some ample depth there. We'll kind of see how the pieces ultimately move. One of the surprises was Dylan Sikorsky, who you guys caught up with this week. He ended up starting in his advanced numbers on PFF. You can check that out at Beavers Edge. We're awesome. He got asked about that during his media session this week as well, and he could be a guy who maybe ushers himself into the starting lineup at one of the guard spots potentially too. He's quite versatile as well. So again, some positives to glean from that Cal game as well. But let's go ahead and flip gears to the other side, Ryan, and talk Fresno State's defense against Oregon State's offense. Just as I kind of have gotten into it and dove into the Bulldogs the last couple days, Fresno State's interior of their line, kind of young. The Beavers might be able to have some more success running the ball. But looking at Fresno State's secondary, they've got some experienced pieces. I believe everybody that starts in their secondary is either a redshirt junior or a senior. So you got quite a bit of experience, kind of across the board. It could be, perhaps tougher to throw the ball at times. Cal was still working in some new pieces from a defensive backfield that was largely, taken to the NFL in the offseason. So there may be more opportunities to run, but I think this Fresno State defense, despite what Kansas was able to do in week one, they could be sneaky good. And I think, once again, Ryan, I think as far as advantages go, Oregon State's defense may have some against Fresno State's offense. Gunderson and the offense could have their work cut out for them, considering how tough it was last week. And I think that this isn't Cal. This isn't Justin Wilcox. This is still first year head coach and Matt Entz, a new staff, all those things. But there are some pieces on that Fresno State defense that I'm intrigued by that could give Oregon State a few fits.
Oh yeah, and I mean you've heard it from Trent, you've heard it also too from Pat McCann as well. The Fresno State ties there, they like to do the similar things that Cal likes to do. So it's really, I think, diving into this film this entire week, the prep, the lead up, and everything involved in that, and basically taking, what didn't go well against Cal and being able to mask those deficiencies, especially on the offensive side of the ball in particular. Like we heard Bray post game say that, and even to on Monday say like there are things that we can do to schematically to help Maalik and the offense out. And it's more
Sure.
of a matter of, I think, tying back to our conversations about simplifying down the approach and what you do really good at versus, not. So that's something there where, yeah, I do think there's a little bit of work cut out, and I understand why that advantage is so narrow, if you look at the spread and everything, but like, I think it's must-win situation, and just being able to take those lessons from Cal and being able to flush, kind of what you did and be able to start fast and not shoot yourself in the foot. That's really it, because I think, yeah, it's a what if we're sitting here and, it's a different kind of loss to Cal, or if it's a win, right? We're talking completely different ball game here. But like, if I think those two things didn't happen, this is probably a different game we're talking about that we're sitting here. So it's starting fast and
Right.
not making those self-inflicted mistakes.
Well, that too, and for what it's worth, Ryan, and I think we can kind of say this too. I think the game day atmosphere was kind of lacking. It wasn't quite the hubbub you would expect for a week one, a night game, a somewhat marquee opponent, as I mentioned. First Power Four team to be opening the year at Reeser in a handful of years. I think 2019 was the last time, and ultimately, yeah, I think there were a few things that were just lacking. The crowd wasn't quite as good as I thought, and I think the crowd, as I mentioned, kind of got the energy got sucked out of them early, and kind of proceeded to set the tone for the game, and then you had the weird thing go on with the scoreboard too. Like it didn't quite feel like a real raucous environment, and I think again, to your point, Ryan, if it's not loud and it's not crazy, how tough was it for Jaron under center for Cal? Like that's a big piece of the true freshman on the road in a tough environment. It's not only the pass rush and speeding up its clock, it's how loud it is. And if I was correct, I don't know if Cal got called for a false start, Ryan. I think they had a defensive delay of game, but I don't think Cal had a false start
No, and
with a
also
true
too, I think
freshman.
you also too credit Brian Harson and Nick
Yeah,
Rolovich for having him prepared, right? Like
big time.
that's also, you give credit where credit's due in that realm. And even Bray said schematically there were things that Cal did that made it easier for Jaron, making his first start. So that's something there where it's like, yeah, it wasn't otherworldly offensively, but it's like if you're able to make, a quarterback feel comfortable early on in a game, regardless of the environment, by the way, like, yeah, he's going to be great. He's going to be able to get the ball where he needs to go and push the ball down the field. So that's really what I think, was kind of a little bit in hand with that. And then, yeah, if I'm Gundy and Maalik Murphy, it's doing the same thing this weekend.
Right. I mean, and again, Ryan kind of talked about the close nature of this game. Obviously, we threw it up at Beaver's Edge this week. Ryan, maybe let's hope it's not the unlucky three, because for the second straight week, Oregon State opens up as a 3-point favorite. They were a 3-point favorite against Cal. It trimmed down to a point and a half by the time game time started. Then obviously we know what happened. This game, looking at it once again, Oregon State will be a 3-point favorite. Again, I don't have the most updated, but I believe that still is holding true as we sit. And again, as we look, the ESPN matchup predictor gives Fresno State the advantage in this game, a 62 to 38% chance for Oregon State, which I think a little interesting, kind of surprising. But then we'll go ahead and give a little peek behind the curtain. Is if you're a Beavers Edge subscriber, you have access to the Massey ratings predictions, which is something that On3 has with Massey ratings, and they give more detailed predictions, and that's usually something for subscribers. But we'll just say in that predictor, Oregon State, Ryan, is predicted to win and does have a 60-40 margin there. So I think it's kind of another one of those maybe slightly better than coin flip games if you're on Oregon State side. If I was saying right now, and I'll kind of tease, read the full prediction later, I'm going to be picking Oregon State in this game. I think there's too much at stake to not pick them, as far as like if they go 0-4, which again, if you lose to Fresno State, folks, again, I'm not trying to get on the glass half empty bandwagon, but if you lose to Fresno State, nothing's going to change where you're going to beat Texas Tech or Oregon on the road, in my opinion, barring a miracle. And again, those things happen, I suppose, from time to time, but I just think you have to right the ship here. Get yourself back to 1-1. At least give yourself some positives going into those two really tough games. Then you see what happens, right? And you play it out because the game still has to be played. But again, Ryan, you need the home crowd to be better. You need there to be more energy in the stadium. You need there to be more energy from the defense. Create a turnover or two. You need the offense to not wait until deep in the game to score a touchdown. I mean, like you said, Ryan, fans are human too. If you're only gonna, kick a field goal, like they'll get excited about that, but you need to score some points to, get that crowd into it. And you had the student section, taking off as the game went on. And Ryan, you and I saw, people were heading for the exits well before the game was over. You just need better vibes on Saturday, and I think that starts with the team being better prepared. Trent Bray talked about how the coaches need to have them better prepared. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, Ryan. I don't know how you couldn't be prepared for a season opening game kind of the way that they weren't, but like you said, it's football. They got punched in the mouth. It happens. They weren't on their game. Now you almost have to over make sure you're ready this time around and really come out with your hair on fire.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right. Like that's essentially what you have to do. It's and what I was saying earlier. It's start fast and keep your foot on the pedal the entire time, because I think this is definitely the game to where that sense of urgency that everyone's been talking about this entire week needs to show out. And however that looks like, that sense of urgency for each, position group across the board. Yeah, right. Like, okay, like now time to put up or shut up time. Like that's really how I see it kind of going forward at this point, because if the same issues plague you again, then yeah, like there's clearly something needs to change and something would have to change fast into these next 2 weeks afterwards, where you're going into two hostile environments, one both on the road. Yeah, sure. The second one is 40 to 50 minutes south of you, but that's still a hostile environment
Oh yeah.
nonetheless. And that game also has some weight too. So it's starting fast and flushing those mistakes and not letting those plague you again in game.
Absolutely. And I think again, it's while it was frustrating, there were a lot of Beaver fans that were frustrated, and rightfully so. It still was one of those things where it's only one game. It was only the first game. Maybe Cal's a little bit better. Maybe the teams are a little bit further apart than we thought at the moment. But improvements can happen. The Beavers have a chance to get back, back to their winning ways, so to speak, get that first win of the season. I will expect a test. I think, I could see Oregon State winning this game by a margin of 3 to 7 points. That's probably where I'm going to be at ultimately. I think there will be big time pressure on them to win this game, but at the same token, I think with their backs against the wall and needing to play better, hearing the criticism this week, I think Oregon State will play better. Trent Bray and his staff, I think they're going to attack the week a lot better, and I think they will. Whether or not that's enough to get the win, we'll ultimately see, but it was maybe a wake-up call and a reality check last week against Cal in some numerous areas. And, sometimes what a team does, Ryan, when their backs are against the wall is like, now we're going to find out what this team is made of. And I think in some sense, what better? Because sure, you got hoodwinked last week, but you can flush it. Now we're gonna see the real stuff this Saturday.
Yeah, like that's basically it. Sometimes you really do know a team and what they are when their back's against the wall.
And it's going to be very exciting to ultimately see what happens. Again, early game after last week, the 7:30 game. Beavers now go 7 hours quicker, and we got a 12:30 game on the CW this weekend. Make sure to stay tuned to Beavers Edge. Me, Ryan Harlan, Brogan Slaughter will all be back at the press box, Reeser Stadium, bringing you guys loads of content, much on an earlier swing of the college football dial this weekend. We'll definitely be excited. Again, stay tuned for our injury report, our predictions, the Edge report, much, much more, the visitors list, everything coming down the line at BeaversEdge.com as we get you guys ready for Oregon State, Fresno State coming up on Saturday. Big thanks to Ryan Harlan for joining me on this edition of the Edge podcast. Catch all his content at BeaversEdge.com and at Ryan Harlan7 on Twitter. For Ryan Harlan, this is Brenden Slaughter signing off on this edition of the Edge podcast.